Hey, this is Stacy from the Soul Pod. And before we get going, I want to say that if you enjoy these talks, longer form versions of a lot of these and other topics are available at the Soul Podcast. It's available anywhere you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, anywhere at all. If you look for it, or you can go to soulpodcast.com. But if you enjoy this and you would like to check out longer form versions of this and exploring other topics, check that out. Today I want to talk about change. Change. The great Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, "There's nothing permanent except change." And I like this because, well, it's a cute, clever quote, but it's also spot on. The one constant in life is change. Everything is changing. Everything. And, generally speaking, we as people don't like change. Most of us are very averse to it. It takes us outside of our comfort zone. And there's a reason for that. We like the familiar because the familiar means comfort, safety. And this hits us at a really core level that many of us forget about. See, we're all just evolved creatures. For millions of years, we were evolving on this planet as every other animal on the planet is. And that's all we are. We're just one more animal on the planet. We just have a little more self awareness than the rest of them, right? And cars and credit cards and things like that. So, in that process of evolving, the familiar meant safe. So the vast majority of our time here on Earth, that was vitally important. It's only been in the blink of an eye that the familiar didn't matter as much. It still matters to a certain extent, and we still tend to lean towards it for safety. But familiar means safe. And so when we get to anything that involves change, it's unfamiliar. And it immediately puts us off. It makes us off balance. It makes us uncomfortable on a really visceral level. And you know what I'm talking about if you've ever made change and you felt uncomfortable. And we all have, because we do thousands of things every day that require us to consider whether we want to make change. Maybe it's just shopping at a different grocery store. But we do much bigger changes than that. Changing jobs, changing relationships, changing brands of cars, or there's an endless number. But what happens is we get outside of our comfort zone, right? When we get outside of our comfort zone, we get really uncomfortable. And this is huge. I mean, we all know someone who has stayed in a bad relationship too long. Maybe even you have. I have. And maybe they know it's a bad relationship. Maybe they even admit it's a bad relationship, but they still stay. And why do they stay? More often than not, it's because it's what they know. They're familiar with it. It may even be an abusive relationship, you know, but they stay far too long. And the reason is they know this misery. They don't know what's out there. That's a giant question mark. We don't like the giant question mark. Change is uncomfortable. I stayed in a bad relationship far too long. It was one that was incredibly unfulfilling, and I knew it was unfulfilling. And I had a number of reasons I stayed. One of which was that I didn't value myself enough to make a change at that time. But a huge factor in me staying was this was the misery I knew. How many times have you stayed in a job that you didn't like too long? Despite the fact you didn't like it, you knew it. You got the paycheck, it was consistent, you knew what to expect, there were no question marks. Out there, you get away from that thing you know, is a giant question mark. It's uncomfortable. But it's a beautiful trade-off because the reality is the only time growth happens is when we get outside of our comfort zone. We got to go towards a giant question mark. We got to get out there and feel uncomfortable and naked and just out of our zone. Take a risk. Look at change. Lean into change. You see, when change happens, we change. We evolve. You see, the way it works is this. When we're in something that isn't working for us, say a bad relationship or a bad work situation, there's this tension that happens and it stretches and stretches. Think it like a big rubber band. It stretches and stretches and stretches until we can't take it anymore. We've all had these moments in our life where we changed. We finally said, I can't take it, and then you change. And usually it's a big shift. And the bigger the issue that we're changing, the relationship, maybe a job situation, whatever it is. The more intense that situation is, and the tighter that tension has become, the more huge the change is when it happens. Like it's like a pendulum swinging from one side to the other, and we see these massive changes that happened. A couple episodes back, I talked about my puffy pirate shirt days of going through spiritual awakening and getting way out there and wearing crazy beads and trying on different versions of myself to see what fit, because I finally gave myself permission to be different and be outside of my comfort zone and be uncomfortable. And so I just went all in. And that happens. We see these massive changes when people make huge changes to their lives. Have you ever known someone who was an addict or an alcoholic or had something of that nature, where when they finally changed, when they hit rock bottom and said, boom, I'm going to go to I'm going to get into recovery, or go to therapy, or just make this change, suddenly that person went from being this intolerable addict to being preachy as hell. And they're like, I can't believe you're drinking a beer, and it's frustrating, right? You're like, but you did this for years on a much larger level. I'm just having a glass of wine. It's really easy to get annoyed about that. But when I see that, I love it. I love it because I know what's happened is they went from this huge point of pressure to just slamming way over to the other side, which is the opposite extreme. But I know that they're not going to stay there. I know that that is just what they needed to do to break out of this thing that was destroying them, what was ruining their life, that was intolerable to them. Because what eventually is going to happen is that pendulum is going to swing back to the middle. They're going to find a new version of themselves, their new version of themselves, the new normal, their stasis, which is going to be very different than this thing that was over here that was intolerable to them, that was tearing them down. So when we do go through a change, or when we know someone is going through a change and they become so incredibly different, like me wearing my puffy white pirate shirts and wearing too many loose, fluffy scarves and weird hats and funny beads and things, I'm glad I went through that. It was awesome. It was a wonderful adventure. But I also knew I wasn't going to stay there. That was just the space where I needed to get to figure out where I want to be, where is comfortable for me, who I am in this moment, just like everyone else who goes through a change. So it's important to give yourself permission to change. And it's important to honor that kind of change when it happens, because when someone breaks out of the normal, what is their current normal, and they break away from it in such a drastic way, it's an act of desperation, but it's also a tremendous act of bravery, because you're choosing a giant question mark. You're leaning into an incredible area of discomfort, and you're creating a whole new version of yourself when you do that. Life is about constant evolution, and that means you're evolving, you're changing. And change is constant in us, in nature, everywhere. Did you know that every 100 days, more than 30 trillion cells in your body are renewed? 30 trillion cells. We renew ourselves. Our entire body is a different body in terms of all the cells being replaced every 100 days or so, right? Everything's different. Now, our thoughts, that all still works fine because we're just filling in the spaces around those synapses in our brains. But every cell is a new cell. Isn't that incredible? You are not the same you that you were when you were 8 years old. You remember you at 8? What your thoughts were, your questions, what you thought about life, what you want to be when you were older, just your attitudes about things. How about 14, 15, 16 years old? What were you like then? Are you the same person now? How about a year ago, 2 years ago? I bet you're not. And if you're embracing change, you're definitely not. Everything is changing. I go to work and I come home and I look out the window. It's springtime. There's a tree outside of my window that every day I get home and it's different. I can see the differences in it. The leaves are starting to come in, and it's growing so fast. I love spring for that reason. But I go to work, I come home, the tree has changed. I go to work, I come home, I have changed. I just can't see it because I'm with me all the time. You're with you all the time. So you don't see it. But we are constantly changing, constantly. And if we embrace change, we change for the better. this beautiful evolution happens. Heraclitus also said that no man steps into the same river twice. What he means by that is it's never the same river, and we're never the same man or woman. And that's because the river, like nature, is constantly flowing. These are not the same molecules of water. Even the stones on the bottom are being moved around. And us, we're not the same person. We're not the same person emotionally, mentally. Every second, we're evolving a little. Listening to my voice, you're evolving a little. You're taking what's useful, leaving what's not. We're all in constant evolution. So no man steps into the same river twice, because it's not the same river and we're not the same person. Evolution matters and change matters. Change is uncomfortable. In the next episode, I'm going to tell you a great tool for change. You see, one of the things we dislike about change is when we think about changing ourselves, we think about what we want, that big thing out there, and it seems unattainable. It is attainable, but not if you try to grab it all at once. I'll show you how to do that, and I'll show you a simple way to get there, to get huge results a year from now, 6 months from now, by doing something here, today, in this moment, that is attainable and easy to do. Plato said, nothing ever is. Everything is becoming. Everything is becoming. Nothing ever is because it's not settled. Like I said, everything's changing. You're changing. I'm changing. The world is changing around us. The leaves are growing on this beautiful tree outside my window. Everything is becoming, including you. You are becoming. You are becoming the best version of you if you're taking the time to embrace change. So go embrace change today and come back and check out the next video, and I'll show you how to grow.